then I got a call from Charles Hoskinson in 2013 that said they need some help working on the legal structure for what ended up becoming Ethereum.
Our relationship was amazing. We were roommates, would you say?
Steven Nerayoff, a technologist and lawyer who helped Ethereum with its crowd sale, he was charged with extortion.
The problem is our lawyers are telling us this is an illegal securities offering, which in fact it was.
I only saw this because thankfully, there's this XRP army because of the Ripple litigation and did this decentralized justice and found these videos.
Putting aside the fundraising that accompanied the creation of Ether, based on my understanding of the present state of Ether, the Ethereum network, its decentralized structure, we believe current offers and sales of Ether are not securities transactions.
Nerayoff also states that he wanted to eliminate any conflicts of interest to protect the project and the people involved. That's why he claimed he wasn't interested in the money.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's special live event. My name is Ray Fuentes, and today we have the privilege to listen firsthand to Steven Nerayoff, a gifted entrepreneur, attorney, venture capitalist, a prominent voice in the crypto community. Steven is a holder of 46 U.S. and international AI patents. He's a former roommate to Vitalik Buterin, former advisor to Ethereum during its ICO back in 2014, and he's the inventor of the legal structure for the first utility token. So Steven was not only present for the inception of Ethereum, but he had front row seats to the record-breaking crowd sale, aka an illegal security offering. So anticipate this conversation to get a little spicy, especially with those who are highly decorated on this panel. Also on the call today is Molly Elmore and Jimmy Vallee of Valhil Advosrs, the consulting arm of Valhil, the leading digital asset investment bank domiciled here in the States. And last but certainly not least is my dear friend Jake Claver, CEO of Syndicatlely, providing infrastructure to help investors launch and manage their own special purpose vehicles, democratizing access to the world of private equity. Now, with that being said, thank you all for joining today. We've got an hour on the call, so let's get down to business. Steven, you supported Vitalik and the team with what is known now today as the Ethereum Foundation, with finding its pathway for its initial crowd sale, helping the team to raise money without resulting in the team going to prison. You covered the initial expenses in good faith. You didn't take any Ethereum as form of compensation, and you also didn't invest in ETH upon its ICO. Why was it so important to you to participate in the development of this ecosystem while avoiding any conflict of interest? It was almost like your sixth sense was preparing you for what was to come.
Well, so why was I interested in helping the project was that when I saw the smart contract capability, I saw a potential system that could revolutionize, our lives, humanity, right? And so, when I saw Bitcoin, I saw, something that could revolutionize the monetary system. And this was kind of like, to me, more like an operating system that could, any other kind of functionality where you can remove the middleman and, have a decentralized network. And to me, that was, really revolutionary in terms of, so that's what got me excited about it. It really, I had no interest in the financial aspects of it. And the part of it was, that's not what was driving me. And part of it, you brought up the conflict of interest, and what I had spoken to a couple of legal minds before the crowd sale, and we decided it was, and it kind of sounds a little, crazy in hindsight because of the way things played out, but that if the SEC came after anybody, for anything that happened, they would actually come after me, and then I had no, interest, financial interest in it, in the project. Clearly, I didn't anticipate them coming after me in the manner that they did, and I want to be clear when I say in that video that it was an illegal securities offering, that was what they were being told prior to my involvement, right? So my job was to turn that into a legal security, not a legal securities offering, but an offering that was not a unregistered sale of securities, right? And that is what I invented, was what became the ICO. And so what I'm saying there is, had the steps that I put in place been followed, then that would not have been an unregistered sale of securities, and Bill Hinman would not have had to brush it aside in his free pass speech, and Ether, at least as far as the crowd sale goes, would not have been a security. But clearly wires were tripped, and that wasn't the case. And what I put in place was not followed. Though I didn't know that myself, but I started getting some uncomfortable feelings about that, around 2015, that, securities wires were tripped in that conversation that I dropped about with me and Vitalik, where he asked me to help save the whole project. I said it as much in there.
Well, let's do a little recap for those in the audience. So it's, July of 2014, the ETH ICO was conducted. 2015, the security wires were tripped. 3 years later, Bill Hinman became the director of SEC in 2017. He leaves Simpson Thacher, a member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which is a trusted law firm for large financial institutions. 6 months later, Bill Hinman gives his infamous free pass speech in 2018. 18 months later after that, Jake Claver leaves the SEC the day after he filed a lawsuit against Ripple. And 6 months after that, Bill Hinman then goes back to Simpson Thacher. Got a little background noise there, excuse me. And then now he's advising for one of the largest venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. It may appear that to me that yes, this industry started from grassroots, but when you zoom out and look at things from a larger picture or in a larger frame, it seems like, and especially when you see these moves from the top, it's almost like these things were planned. What are your thoughts, and do you agree?
So, I mean, I don't have anything, I've been very, very, very careful that, not to be saying things that are, conspiratorial, meaning where I don't have something to base it in fact, right? So I can't tell you that I have something in fact that this was all planned out. But I will say that your kind of read on the situation is quite the number of coincidences that you put together, and then the interests of folks that are making decisions that are going from government back into private industry, and the questionable decisions they're making in government then being so directly beneficial to them when they go back into private industry, not counting the fact that it was actually beneficial to them while he, like Bill Hinman, was in public office. Certainly it's like, it makes your head scratch, and I will say that Ethereum was not, this I will tell you is I believe very factual. Ethereum was not decentralized at the time that he made that speech. And both Joe Lubin and Vitalik Buterin went in under oath in the SEC right prior to that speech, a month and about 3 or 4 months prior to that speech, to discuss that specific issue. And neither one of them could have believed it was decentralized, because I have signed documents stating otherwise, signed by Vitalik, and I have a chain of custody to Joe Lubin himself.
Interesting. Molly, what do you believe the purpose of Bill Hinman's Ethereum free pass speech was for? I mean, they gave Bitcoin and ETH both the stamp of decentralization.
Right. I mean, it gave a green light to open a window of time. I am curious, Steven, as someone who was there throughout this, do you remember there being a time where it felt like things shifted and changed? The original intentions seemed honorable and good, but something obviously shifted. Do you remember feeling that?
Yeah, I do. And it was somewhere like kind of when the crowd sale was sort of like actually in motion, and post that. And I've talked about where I started Consensys with Joe Lubin. And so the crowd sale was during the summer of 2014. And in around October, November or so, I got so uncomfortable that I actually told Joe, I'm like, here, you could take my interest back in Consensys, whatever, my interest would be, and I'm just going to go my way, you go your way. And I started feeling very uncomfortable, like kind of at that point. And that's when I, also started doing some recording of calls just as backup. I never really expected to blow into something like this.
Did it feel like there was an invisible hand kind of guiding things, or was it just Joe Lubin making his own independent decisions?
It felt like there was things that were going on that I couldn't explain. So if you call that invisible hand or hands, it certainly felt like there was unexplainable reasons why people weren't following things that would otherwise be in their interest from a legal perspective. So like when you don't follow something and it's illogical, I think Sherlock Holmes said, if the only answer you have to a question is the most improbable one, but it's the only one that's left, that's, then that has to be the answer, however improbable, and kind of you were in that position where you were just scratching your head and saying like, why are these people doing this? And there must have been some other reason, but I certainly wasn't aware at the time.
And were you in a position with Joseph Lubin where you could openly be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you going this way? Or
yeah, sure. I had that conversation with him many times, and he's very close to the vest. I saw him do some like really bizarre things that I wouldn't say are directly related to this, but were very much directly related to showing me the character of the man. And I made no bones about it. Like when I looked at him and I told, it was a conversation we were having in the hallway, and I looked at him and we were talking, and I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, this dude is a sociopath. I need to get away from this guy. And that's, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't mean that in medical terms, but it's colloquially to my mind, I'm like, this guy is not safe. I quite didn't realize how on target I was with that.
Hey, Jimmy, who do you think who's got the invisible hand? Who's responsible for this corruption pudding?
Corruption pudding. Oh, that's a blast from the past, right?
It sure is. I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Always enjoy spending time with Steven and hearing the inner details about, the past. I think my thesis, right? And I kind of came onto this journey when Deaton, this is in 21, when Deaton had first published the kind of what was the big timeline, where they had a lot of the video that Steven referenced, that they had assembled together. I think Deaton had published all the videos in chronological order, which was very helpful for me as an attorney. In the early days of practicing, doing chronologies for cases is a very common thing that you do. So it seemed like a good idea to take my own due diligence that we had been doing and layer it into Deaton's timeline and kind of just see what the story, what does it reveal? This, what was very humbling and it kind of made me sad, to be honest with you, is as you started to play the movie back, and you made the connection of Bill Hinman and Jake Clayton in the Alibaba IPO, and then you can kind of continued it back from that. This story really begins way long time ago, like 2004. That forces kind of get set in motion. It's right around the time that Brad Garlinghouse writes the Peanut Butter Manifesto at Yahoo. Yahoo had a 40% interest in Alibaba at that time. And if you read the Peanut Butter Manifesto with that in mind, and then kind of the way this whole thing that I'll explain to you played out, it's almost as if he was writing that memo to management, forewarning them about exactly what they were getting involved in. But the thesis of it is that we're spreading ourselves too thin. We're looking at too many different things. We should be focused as a company. It would take some number of years, I think it was 2012, until Yahoo ended up divesting, really because of market forces. What Brad Garlinghouse had predicted became very manifest in their business, and Yahoo was struggling. So they had to divest of that 40% interest. And it was purchased by a financial group that included a firm called New Horizon. New Horizon is a princeling private equity firm out of China. Princeling means it was the son, a gentleman named Winston Wu, the founder of New Horizon, was the son of the premier of China at that time. So it would literally be as if Hunter Biden made the investment for Alibaba to repurchase the interest from Yahoo, which they did. 2 years later is when Simpson, Thatcher, and Sullivan Cromwell, Bill Hinman and Jake Claver, respectively, end up doing the public offering in America for Alibaba. New Horizon 5x'd their investment over that 2-year period and immediately moved into backing Bitcoin mining and stuff like that. So they're one of the large investors in BitDeer, which is now a public Bitcoin mining company, large operation here in my state, actually in Texas. So, the pieces, and then I would come to learn later about Wang Zhang's involvement in 2015 in Ethereum. It's a great story, right? Vitalik, they were struggling, right? The business wasn't really turning over after the attempted pre-sale. So they were struggling. Vitalik learns Chinese. I think he learned Mandarin and goes to China. And basically, like he was sleeping on Steven's couch before, he starts sleeping on other people's couches there. And they financially supported him. So there was the Hashkey group and what's the Wang Zhang derivative that anyway? Sorry, it's a Wang Zhang derivative company. Yeah, directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party that ends up making a material investment and bought 400,000 ETH, I think, or something like that. And it basically saved the project. So from that moment forward, you've got the people who end up running the SEC, you've got their firms are involved in the Ethereum Alliance, and you've got the effectively agents of the Chinese Communist Party who are influencing the development of this space. Even all that, for me personally, I kind of don't care about that. It's like because I'm a free market capitalist, right? It's one thing to kind of have some advantages, have some connections, but I really didn't care about that. What changed everything to me, obviously they got the free pass speech in 2018, and that helped the Ethereum project a lot. But not only that, it like a magnet attracted all the development talent, all the other projects that got issued on Ethereum that could have been issued on other chains. Didn't happen. Still no problem. The problem was when these two guys, Hinman and Clayton, then end up suing basically the primary competitor of the Ethereum project and have basically put them in timeout ever since. Now, wonderfully, we're evolving out of that, right? I mean, the projects speak for themselves, the tech speaks for themselves, but the damages along the way from 2018 to today, including damages that we've experienced, but a lot of investors in XRP specifically, is very, very bad. It's in the trillions of dollars. So, who played the hand? It was the banking system trying to front run this move to digital. It was the Communist Party to some extent, but that's a theory,
Well, let's stick with you for a hot second, Jimmy, because I believe you relate with Steven in many ways. Your intuition compelled you to complete various exercises when all this was occurring, and I'm talking about the detailed valuation models for the digital asset XRP. You also have been an advocate for the buyback of the digital asset XRP. Without getting into the weeds, what compelled you to carry out these exercises was it in response to what you were seeing in the market, or was it your sixth sense speaking to you, just like Steven's was?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So in the spring of 21, we had done a lot of this diligence. We had made the connections, not as much as we have now, but certainly we had Hinman front and center in the crosshairs and the Alibaba stuff. And like I said, I was kind of sad, but it was also a revelation that the government was coming for for the digital assets, right? And so being an attorney, I immediately said, well, it'll be too late 5 years from now when all this stuff bubbles up to the mainstream consciousness to establish what the value should have been, but for this action by the federal government, which when all this is revealed, and most everybody on this call knows about this, most of the people probably watching this are aware of this, but there's a whole bunch of people in the world who don't know about this whole thing.
We've got over 1,300 people on the call, so
great.
It's doing well.
So it was important for me to get on the record what the value would have been if the ultimate intended use case for XRP would have been realized. And it may never be realized. I mean, these things that occurred 2018 to 2020, largely at the hands of the SEC, that's a bell. If the egg got scrambled, the bell got rung. We may never know what it otherwise would have done. But the intention was that this was going to be, the XRPL is going to be the layer one to run all the money, okay? And that implies a very, very high value of XRP, because XRP is just like Steven's process with Ethereum, the way he wanted to be, XRP is the oil, just like Ethereum's the oil on the network to push the value, right? And when you view it from that perspective, I grew up doing deals in the oil and gas business, right? So that's a commodity, right? That's the character of moving something like that or greasing the system is the type of thing that commodities do. So I think it's genius. We talked about this, Steven, the last time we were all together, and the idea to recharacterize it as a good versus a security was truly a stroke of genius. I commend you for that. I wish they would have followed through, which would have meant it would have gone slower, right? Their ramp would have gone slower. But today, probably the entire industry would be free if they would have followed Steven's advice.
On that note, switching over to Steven, let's talk about those early days at Ethereum, the thought process or utility behind Ethereum. But let's look past smart contracts, Steven. Take us to the root of the deal when you guys were at the roundtable at ground zero. What was the team trying to achieve? And keep in mind, Ripple Labs, the company revolutionizing cross-border payments, had officially launched 2 years prior to the Ethereum ICO. So what was Ethereum trying to accomplish? Were you guys as well trying to create a platform? And if so, for what? Stablecoins?
Yeah, no, it was, it's actually in Camila Rizzo's book where it was on our Slack channels, and Vitalik was at my house, and I said, there was these veiled comments, and it's just kind of eerie in retrospect, about the big banks, and I think they were pointing the finger at mostly at like Goldman Sachs for no particular reason, and it seemed very much also they were pointing the finger at Joe. It was like veiled, if you read between the lines. And I said, I called Vitalik V. I'm like, yo, V, check this out. Like they're saying like the banks are somehow have taken over our project. And he went out on the Slack boards and said, look, we're agnostic. As if banks want to use it, great. If everybody else wants to use it, great. So I guess what I'm saying is, ostensibly what he was saying, at least, internally on our internal boards was, there was no specific intent, and it was supposed to be, an agnostic platform where anybody could utilize it. And so it wasn't geared towards, specific stable coins or even DeFi for that matter. DeFi just maybe is an early use case where, you've seen that in other and apps on our phone. And there were early use cases, and then it kind of exploded from there. And then there were things that you just couldn't even imagine. And that's really what we were imagining, were the things that we couldn't imagine. And what could you do decentralized where you couldn't do it centralized? It wasn't as simple as, oh, okay, we're just going to take, Bitcoin is pretty basic, where it's like, all right, we're a bank, value transfer, and we're going to take the middleman out, and we're still going to be able to do value transfer in a trustless environment. I don't take away the genius of that. I'm just saying it's simplistic in its understanding of it. This was a lot more complex in terms of what could happen going from there. So, all that being said, I will say while the banks kept coming up again and again and again, and whether or not that was just because it was an early use case and it was an obvious use case, or was there something else more behind that? I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that question. People ask me, about JP Morgan or whatever. I didn't have any interactions with them. So I did mention that we had a meeting, Joe and I had a meeting, which I had forgotten about, with the Federal Reserve, which was, I remember at the time was kind of like a little bizarre, like, why are we talking to the Federal Reserve? But it didn't quite make much sense to me. So, but Joe seemed to have, I would say, some access to players inside the government and in private industry that were a little surprising to me, given his background, where he had never been more. It never been confirmed that he was at Goldman Sachs. Nobody ever because that was the point of contention. And then he was a record producer in Jamaica, and he went to Princeton, and he was roommates with
Mike Novogratz.
Correct, Novogratz. And so, I guess he had some connections there, but there wasn't anything in his background that indicated, that this was, he was like at the center of some global cabal or something like that, where, nothing indicated that. So sometimes, the connections that he was making were a little bit like shocking.
Well, per your most recent article aiming at Joe Lubin, you mentioned he's responsible for market manipulation, colluding with governments, preventing the growth of the overall ecosystem, dumping on retail, basically fleecing the public for billions, potentially trillions. I mean, what exactly do you believe he did?
So I think
that led to these claims.
Right. So I mean, let's back up for a second. Going on like what Jimmy's talking about, and the damages to Ripple holders and to XRP holders, and then to Ripple, the company itself, right? And that's just a microcosm in terms of the macrocosm of the digital asset space, which goes beyond crypto itself, right? It goes into, I did the first security token on an entity called T0, and it blends into that. It blends into tokenization. It blends into all these other areas, and they all got stifled, right? And so the idea was to have decentralized applications, right? So there's this one hand where they held back because Ethereum 2.0 was supposed to come out in 2016, and that was supposed to scale at layer 1, right? It wasn't supposed to be layer 2s and layer 3s and side chains and all of this other, nonsense, right? They said we're going to scale at layer 1. Gavin Wood was, on, and I'm not saying that he had anything to do with this, but he and Nick Vitalik are both on record videos saying that in 2016 they're going to release that, and it wasn't released. And so now, like Jimmy said, you had all these developers going onto this chain, and the chain, you really couldn't build anything on this chain because it didn't scale. So they brought everybody onto this thing, and then they put a roadblock, to actually create any development. So everywhere, and then the other chains were kind of like ghost towns with tumbleweed, in it, and so there wasn't any ability to do anything there. So it really, that's in terms of. I think they set the market back. I think the world would be a different place today had that not happened. The fleecing of the public, that's a different issue, right? And that's partly my fault. I mean, it's like in the sense that I created this ICO concept and how to do it, and people like Joe Lubin have a front row seat, and I'm thinking I'm doing something good because I'm actually creating something that works within the United States securities laws, right? I wasn't showing a way of people to get around the law, right? I was just showing people a way to get, here's a way to go through the law. And it's interesting that the SEC doesn't seem to be, they didn't want to give any direction or guidance. And here I am giving the guidance on behalf of them. And they don't seem to be very happy about that. That's pretty telling in and of itself, right? They don't really want clarity into the marketplace. So I guess they could go, enforce the way they want to enforce. And then Joe starts, Token Factory. The Foundry, I think it was called Token Foundry, where they're just churning out ICO after ICO, and go do the math on, see how many of those ICOs survived, right? So people think that the market cap of crypto is going up. Well, I mean, like if you do $1 billion ICO and then it goes down to zero, and you replace it with another $1 billion ICO, it goes down to zero. You do that 10 times over. How many billions of dollars have you pulled out of the system? But the market cap hasn't changed, right? The market cap's the same thing, but you're fleecing money off of retail, and if you do that a little bit more, and you're like, oh, wow, actually the market cap went up, right? But how much money actually went through the system, out of retail's hands and into the pocket of a very small group of people, right? So that's kind of where the fleecing starts coming in. And, I don't want to get into like the exploits and, all of those other things, that's more, let the online sleuths get involved with that. I will say that there does seem to be an incredible amount of concentration of about 2 or 3 parties controlling the majority of the ETH. So all these gas fees, they show that Ethereum was the fastest entity. It's interesting that they call it an entity. It's just supposed to be a decentralized network to get to $10 billion in revenue, right? And they're comparing it against Google. And I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be compared against Google because Google actually is a corporation, but those $10 billion, where did those go? It went to the people that owned, the mining, which when you look on chain tend to be the same entities that own the Ether. And now with the proof of stake, they don't even have to go through this extra step of actually pretending like they're, different people mining, right? We just own the Ether, we're just going to get it, and we just, because we're staking it. So
was that the plan all along, to switch from proof of work to proof of stake? Was that in the early roadmap?
Not that I recall, no.
Interesting, because that seems like the economics change, right? You could be a miner in a proof of work environment and have a shot at, validating the ledger and getting the reward. But in proof of stake, it's definitely geared towards the whales who have the most in their bags, are going to benefit from those fees proportionally.
You mentioned 3 entities. Would you be willing to opine on that, Steven? Or maybe Jake, would you be willing to make a guess or throw some names in a hat?
Which 3 entities?
Potential entities of acquiring most of the Ethereum upon its ICO.
I would
supporting that gradual incline that seemed to be manufactured.
I mean, I'm sure Jimmy can pull up the 3 largest miners right now and tell you which 3 those likely are.
What I can pull up, you guys keep talking, but I can pull up the timeline and find out, because this was
Steven, do you recall?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects of it. There's who bought the majority of
that's what I was going to ask.
Ether in the ICO.
Yeah.
Right, and then who did the majority of the mining? And so there's been some online research which I helped with, and some other people, because the reason I was able to be helpful is that I had a list of the contributors to the project. And so it showed that, for example, Joe got X amount of Ether, and there was only one wallet that had that much. So you knew that that wallet was connected to Joe. And then if that wallet was connected to all these other wallets that actually bought Ether into the crowd sale, and you grouped all those wallets together, you got some astronomical percentage, according to some of the online sleuths. And then the same thing with Wensheng, the Far East entity, where you had it was basically a wallet that was associated with their they had like these
like
conferences.
Like
they had these conferences. Well, they had companies, but they had these conferences where they would talk about blockchain over in Shanghai, and one of the wallets that was associated, that was getting the revenue from that wallet was attached to a wallet that received the contributor ether, which is really bizarre. Like, why is that? Why is this Chinese entity getting the contributor ether? Because that wallet then goes and sets up Vitalik's wallet, goes and sets up the Ethereum Foundation's wallets, and so you've got this Chinese-controlled wallet setting up all of the wallets for the Ethereum Foundation, and that's just like, huh? Like, it's, forget about where they're from. It's just like, why is the Ethereum Foundation not doing it himself? And I know it was suggested to Vitalik at the time that he shouldn't be doing this himself, which he ostensibly had said he was doing, that it should be a transparent public endeavor by a group, and he rejected that idea.
Wow.
So Ray, I put an article in the chat, and maybe when you publish this for people to watch in the future, you can put this article with it. But in April of 2015, Dr. Xiao Feng, who is the chairman of the HashKey Group, gave a talk, and he basically described his whole meeting Vitalik and basically putting the money in and effectively saving the project at that time. They received 466,000 ETH, and what they gave a $500,000 donation at the time, and then they also agreed. This is a quote: "In addition to the U.S. $500,000 donation, Wangsheng Blockchain in 2015 promised to continuously support the development of Ethereum as needed. After the successful launch of the Ethereum mainnet in 2015." The Ethereum Foundation clearly had no urgent need for additional funding, but we were keen to keep our promise. Therefore, we proposed to the foundation that if the Ethereum Developers Conference is moved to China, Wangsheng Blockchain Labs will sponsor the entire event, and any ticket revenue and sponsorship revenue generated will go to the Ethereum Foundation. Hence, that was the beginning of the annual Shanghai International Blockchain Week. And the other thing that happened right around that time is Mike Novogratz bought Ethereum from the foundation for 98 cents and 99 cents.
Wow.
Undisclosed the amount. So I would say that Wangsheng Blockchain and Mike Novogratz would be two of the entities probably that have a whole bunch.
Question, because typically in this industry, when there's an ICO, there's documentation about, the executive teams and the positions that they receive, or the stake of the network. Is this
like in a public offering, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. So in relation to, I'm thinking of crypto, is this typical behavior for, an executive to create many wallets to then go back and absorb the assets after distribution?
You mean like FTX? So crypto's a new world, right? And there's a mindset of people who approach the market exactly like a securities market, except because of the lack of regulation, there's really no rules. So things that apply in the securities market, like insider trading, for example, aren't really applicable to crypto yet, right? Because Congress and the SEC just haven't laid out the rules. Why? Because if they lay out the rules, companies will comply with the rules, and they'll start to have their projects in a legal compliant manner, and then there's nothing that they can really do, right? So I think you've had some people that are super smart people, super smart business people, morally a little flawed, ethically a little flawed, who have jumped out in front of the market and done things that they would not be able to do in securities world that they've been permitted to do because it's the dawn of the digital asset market. I think if you want to know who those people are, there's a list of people that were published in connection with Empower Oversight's FOIA request, one of their early FOIA requests of everybody who talked to Bill Hinman at the SEC, like during this time. And there's a long list of people. Mike Novogratz is on that list. But these would probably all be the people who had direct information from the SEC about how the SEC was thinking about crypto and how they were planning to regulate it. The type of thing that could make you go on stage and bet dimes to donuts that the SEC was going to say that it was a security, but it's not a security anymore, roughly 4 days before Bill Hinman walks on stage and says almost, quote, that exact thing.
Yeah, I'm having a vision of Mike Novogratz at the Bitcoin conference wearing his sparkly outfit and getting all that attention. Very confident.
We're not conspiracy theorists here. This is just stuff that's on video that we see them. And when you put them on a timeline, it seems to tell a story.
And Jimmy, do you think it was just arrogance that people like Novogratz said these things on video, or they just didn't think they were going to get caught? Like, why would you do these sort of foolish things in hindsight?
Well, that's a really good question, Molly, and my answer is going to shock you. Like the SEC is going after Ethereum right now, right? But they don't want to go after them kind of pre-merge or whatever. It's all post-merge. And all the real shenanigans happen. Everybody knows it. It's like the sky is blue, right? There should be judicial notice that all the shenanigans happen kind of pre-merge or maybe in connection with the merge. But they can't go after Ethereum for that time pre-merge around the ICO because an SEC official walked out onto a stage and told the world that Ethereum was decentralized and that it wasn't a security. And then the chairman of the SEC went on other stages and basically referred to him in speech and said the same thing. And they did a whole roadshow about this where SEC officials were on CNBC, all the major financial networks saying the same thing. That is like due process gold. It's like, what are you talking about? If as much as I'm troubled by what all happened about this, and as much as, I mean, I've been personally damaged, others have been personally damaged, but more it's a derivative because it's the Ripple SEC lawsuit that really kind of impacted us. But even I, who's not a litigator, could put the SEC out of business if they try to come at me with this due process. It's due process gold. What are you talking about? SEC officials went in onto stages and said that we were sufficiently decentralized. We just acted in accordance with what they said publicly. There is no way that the SEC can go back and unring that bell. And we all know that there's reasons why those people at that time went out and said, you know, they were compensated in some manner. I mean, Bill Hinman's the head of regulatory affairs at A16Z right now. Jay Clayton went to Apollo, and what was the other company he joined that had made the One River, something like that. You know, all these guys, and by the way, every one of these people either went to crypto supporting law firms or went to crypto companies right out of their positions at the SEC.
Also, right when the market rocketed up.
Yeah. So, you know, what are we going to do? It's like the SEC should probably be shut down, to be honest with you. And that's bold for me to say because I grew up as a securities lawyer. The SEC was really good, and like the epitome of ethical and you know, they were always helpful. You know, you'd submit your materials. They may have comments. They were tough, but very, very fair. And that, you know, basically you track back to that speech and really now we've got the emails that, you know, of the internal SEC discussions that were leading up to the speech. You've got a small handful of people who completely sold out securities regulation in the United States, in my opinion. There needs to be massive reform, and we've got to get the digital asset stuff clarified. And Congress doesn't seem to want to do it. So it's a political, football. That's why, John Deaton and Elizabeth Warren is kind of that battle's coming up to the forefront. You've got Ryan Selkis and Ripple and others who formed the digital asset pack or crypto pack that they're supporting very vocally. Politicians who are pro crypto. They're trying to influence this change in the federal government, which the federal government seems to be very resistant to want to do. But it's going to happen. I mean, we are going to move forward. But the SEC, capital markets reform is long overdue. And the digital asset piece is, Molly, you and I talk about this all the time, but the digital asset piece is a huge part of it. The other part is the accredited investor rule is horrendous. You probably need to completely reform the way disclosures are made, the S1 process, all this stuff. And for God's sake, if there's fraud at the freaking government level, there needs to be severe penalties for that. I mean, these Mike Milken, who insider traded on junk bonds and information he was getting about the deals they were funding back in the 80s, was basically, excluded from the capital markets forever, right? Jay Clayton's going on CNBC almost daily talking about pontificating about, how securities markets should be regulated. It's like, what are you talking about?
It was, I watched a clip today and it just blew my mind.
I'm going to get off my soapbox. But.
Yeah. Hey, well, on the switching gears here, I'd love to get some perspective from you, Jake. As a fellow CEO from the industry yourself, do you believe that the Joe Lubins can recover from this, or do you think the companies which they lead, such as Consensys, who has locations, all around the world, and also a parent company to MetaMask, do you think that he can recover? Because I don't believe Consensys and the companies are going anywhere.
Different way. Is Digital Ascension Group investing in Consensys and Consensys related projects?
Absolutely not.
Well, there you go.
No, I would stay away from that with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, that's tough, right? So I don't know what the consequences are going to be for him or the other people involved with this. Obviously, that's to be seen. Hopefully, justice is served. Right. I think everybody wants that at this point. But there's just been so much infrastructure that's been built on top of that network because of the green light that it was given. It would be a shame if all of that just went away. Mm-hmm. Right. You've had you did foster innovation on that network. You have had all these DeFi protocols and other solutions developed in that ecosystem. Even though the layer one's not scalable, the EVM itself is a good technology that can be moved and migrated onto other networks and be supported. And those other projects could go with that, right? So if you removed him, the way that you originally proposed the question, it also involved the Ethereum Foundation. And so I think that there definitely needs to be some risk mitigation taken to make sure that it's not just a complete collapse of the ecosystem. Does removing him as CEO do that? I don't think so. I think you could probably remove him and add somebody else in there that was effective, that is going to do the right things. I'm interested to see, the statute of limitation and what you pointed out, Jimmy. If Congress were to regulate the space, does that give justification for the SEC to go back and maybe fix what they did and prosecute?
So there's a concept in our Constitution about Congress being prohibited from passing ex post facto laws.
Got it. Which
are basically laws that would go and unwind contracts that were made in a previous.
Can't be retroactive. It only has to go forward.
So I don't think so. I mean, well, first, let me say I agree with your analysis on the tech that has developed out of, because there was a ton of world-class development talent that, basically migrated to Ethereum because it did have
it's got a green light. We know we're good.
Some really great tech. So we definitely have a don't throw the baby out with the bathwater situation. So I it's going to be tough. How do we rectify what happened in the past? and structure the industry such that we really, benefit going forward. I don't know. It's going to be tough to work through.
What are you? Oh, not for you, Molly.
I've long referred to as Ethereum as the AOL of crypto before I even knew anything about ETHGate, and that it was a very dominant. If you were old enough to remember AOL in its peak, it was the dominant software at the time. They had this large merger with Time Warner, was the biggest, I think, M&A deal in that sector at the time. And the idea that AOL would not be around for a long time would have felt weird at the time. But it was innovative. However, technology moves so fast, and internet technology moves so fast, that I think that we'll see that very smart, capable people will burst into the scene now that Larry Fink's tokenization speech has made the rounds, and we're seeing that banks and businesses are starting to embrace this technology in a way that we wanted years ago, but is finally here. I'm curious too, having had no idea about this type of corruption, if in the early days of the internet, the same thing kind of happened. And, I worked at a company that did ad effect and research, and MySpace was our biggest client for several years. And they had gotten bought by News Corp, and we were actually hiring people in anticipation of this increase in work for us. And all of a sudden, within about 2 or 3 months, it was like MySpace was practically shut down and Facebook entered stage left. And it was remarkable to watch that as an insider, how quickly that happened. And it almost looked like there were invisible hands being behind the scenes in that as well. So I think this might be unfortunately a movie that has played a couple of times with different names and different characters. And I hope that now groups like the XRP Army and the incredible sleuths and researchers we have in this community who have brought to light a lot of this corruption, that we're now awake enough to the point where from this day forward, if this corrupt government attempts to pull these types of shenanigans, we're onto it from day one, and we're no longer going to be oblivious to this sort of blind trust for the government that we had for many years.
Well, if you have the tokenization of financial products and securities themselves, then you can see the transactions on a public mainnet, right? And then you can make these connections. And that, I think, is the beauty of blockchain and what's transpired, right? Because if you just had these shell companies and you had the anonymity and they were ones making the investments, you would have some track record. But because you have wallet addresses on a public chain that you can see, and you kind of know, okay, this person, because of the amount they were allocated, this is where it started. You can draw those conclusions that Steve pointed to earlier.
Is this part of the point of the attempt to remove the old Ethereum history to?
Well, that's what I was going to ask Steven about. So David Schwartz mentioned that he had sold what he had purchased in Ethereum early on to put a roof on his home, but you can't find that transaction if you go to look for it. Why did they remove a portion of the history? Do you have any idea on that?
Well, I put out a recording with some of the founders, and Joe, made that statement, which I only picked up a couple of years ago when I listened to it. I was like, well, what did he just say? I hadn't picked up on him. He said, it doesn't have to be a trail if you don't want there to be kind of the way cryptocurrencies work. And I'm like, what? And I was just like, that's immutability. That's not the way cryptocurrencies are supposed to work at all. That's the way a database works, right? That's controlled by a couple of players, and then all of a sudden shows up. Vitalik puts out this roadmap, and there's a thing called the purge in there, and the purge is to erase data, and unless you're going to run, and people are saying, well, no, not really erase. You can run your own full node, and you could still okay, that's great, but if you're using an online sleuthing tool, you're not going to be able to do that, and very few people will. So it'll be siloed in a few locations, and it'll just be very difficult to obtain that kind of information. Why it's already being information's already going away. I'm not. There's no answer to that. I don't have an answer to that. I'd like to say there was one. I will say that to Molly's point, I was running internet companies in Silicon Valley in the 90s. And so, we did see this play out before. And, they went after, rightfully, wrongfully. I think it was Frank Quattro's group. They went after him, and that, and they said there was a lot of, and there was actually securities laws that they were claiming were being broken, kind of like the Michael Milken situation. And there are two things that I would say. Number one, I made a post about this. I made a bunch of articles where came out of it is that everybody should really understand this is not against Ethereum. I'm in agreement with everybody here. Like, I put my blood, sweat, and tears, and the last thing I would want to see is for the technology that was developed and all these years, to kind of go to waste, right? And so, I don't want to see Ethereum collapse. The issue is with bad actors, individuals in the government, and in private industry, and the collusion between those, right? So that's one thing that really is important to understand. The other thing that I think is important to understand is that the likelihood that that even Ethereum or that potentially any layer one blockchain that we know is actually the end, the winner long term, is actually very, very low right now. And I recently went out, made a couple of trips out, into some places like Dubai and elsewhere where there's a lot of the development going on, and I saw some layer one blockchains that are like light years ahead. And when you go back to, as Molly was saying, so let's say we go back to the search, wars. Remember, there was like Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and Answers.com, and there's all of these, and they were all, and Yahoo, which was manually like doing it, and like somebody at some point thought that would scale, right? I don't know, maybe Brad should have written a manifesto on that. Right, that would have been like about a paragraph, but
that was the jelly side. That would have been the jelly. You have the peanut butter, you need the jelly.
Exactly, right. But then all of a sudden in 1999, out of nowhere, pops in,
Google.
Exactly, and algorithms, and and like, whoa, like, and today it's kind of, of course, right, and then the interesting thing there is, like, in a lot of ways, ChatGPT is overtaking them, right? And so if you look back at like Napster, and Napster was doing something illegal, right? And piracy, but they were able to like kind of get it because it was centralized entities, right? And then different ones, these file sharing services, right? And then Tor came in, and it was like really, it was kind of decentralized, like, and it was really hard to get to. But what ended up happening was, and I think we'll see this here, is that the market ended up realizing this was actually something people wanted, and they were trying to find illegal ways to get to it because there was no legal way to get to it. And so what ended up happening from Napster all the way through all of these illegal things, right? And then you ended up with like Spotify. Right, and there's like 400 of those types of services out there right now that are legal, that change the entire industry. And what I'm saying there is that the free market eventually will solve these problems, right? It's the fact that what Jimmy was saying is like, I worked with Joe Grunfest, which was, probably, the most, honorable and respected chairman of the SEC in the last 50, 70 years, right? And so the SEC that he was running, is a very different SEC than you see Clayton and Gensler running, right? And so it's when you get these, what's unusual here is, the SEC and other agencies were going after the Napsters of the world appropriately, right? Here, they're picking and choosing winners inappropriately. And so that's kind of like the difference between this situation and those other situations. And if we can get rid of I do think actually getting rid of the bad actors, and then there's a second step to it. So I think there's a way to fix this. So like Milken, you got rid of Milken, right? But then there was also, and then you got rid of Drexel, his firm, that burned to the ground.
All the people who were really doing the insider trading stuff.
Correct. But that market got heightened scrutiny. It got more regulations because that was a wild, wild west, the junk bond market. and it was dominated by a few players. Sounds very familiar. It's actually an excellent analogy that you were giving. And the government put in compliance programs, to kind of like monitor that market. And today it's, a very non-dominated, worldwide market that, for sub debt and is being utilized, that has a function and is appropriately being monitored. So there's no reason to think that we couldn't. So it's kind of like get the bad actors out, put compliance programs in place. And I'm not in any way saying this because I actually don't believe necessarily. I'm not gonna say one way or the other, but they came in and they kind of plucked CZ out of finance, right? And I happen to be a little more sympathetic towards CZ. I don't put him in the same category as, SBF. Really, the 4 months and 25 years is probably still not even fair. SBF probably should have gotten twice as much as that. But what the government's doing here, and I'm not sure whether or not it was necessary or not in that situation, but the idea is similar, is in their mind, they took the bad actor out. I'm not saying CZ is a bad actor because I think he was actually very good for the industry. But then they're putting a compliance program, right? And they're like literally, they've got people inside of Binance now monitoring about Binance. And there are things like what are called deferred prosecution agreements, where this really happened when Arthur Anderson got taken down, as a result of
Enron.
Enron?
Exactly. So you had this small group of people in this 100,000 person organization, and the government decided, let's just take down the whole organization. And then afterwards, they're like, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't have done that. And so they decided to come up with these deferred prosecution agreements where they're saying, okay, there's some bad actors in like a big company or in a big space, right? And so let's take the bad actors out. Let's put a compliance program in. Let's not destroy the baby, throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's not the baby, it's like a whole freaking orphanage you throw out with it, right? It's like, and that's basically what they were doing. And so let's just, let's put new people in charge and let's monitor that for 3 to 5 years. And, what happens, at the end of the day, I know everybody, look, nobody has been affected, I think, like in a very literal way, more by actions of people like Joe Lubin. We got falsely prosecuted by 4+ years, and there's really kind of no question who was behind that, both in the industry and, the SEC had nothing to do with it, but they have 14 gigabytes of data on me. Like, that's interesting, right? But even me, I'm not really that interested in revenge, right? What can we do now? I did that. I lived through it. I thank the good Lord above that I am a free man right now, and that I was able to prove that they fabricated the case against me. Okay, that's good. That's behind me right now. Now, what can we do productively, right? So, does it really matter to me? Is there a tinge of satisfaction if Joe Lubin, gets prosecuted? It's not a satisfaction. It's more like we live in a society where justice is supposed to be served. So it's more like, do we live in the country that we think we live in, right? And so if he's not, maybe we don't exactly live in the country that we thought we lived in. And so that's really the issue. It's not like, he didn't pay for what he did wrong, and that's bad. It's more like we got a systemic issue of why somebody could get away with something like that, or even a Clayton, and certainly Hinman, with all of the, and they weren't being careful back then, right? So you saw the lawsuit I have against the government, and one of the issues I think that they're going to have is when I go forward with that lawsuit, is the discovery that will be entitled to. They're treated as a regular average citizen. They have no special privileges as being a government in this type of what's called Federal Tort Claims Act, FTCA, and that means that this 14 gigabytes of data, I would be entitled to. And so, like, we see from the Hinman emails, these guys were not being careful, right? And somebody was saying, you were talking about, I think, dimes to donuts, and were they being cocky or whatever? I don't know if they were being cocky, if they were not being cocky. I do know this: they were certainly not being careful, which says something else really that should be really concerning to people. If you have, in my case, we've identified, several dozen people that knowingly were behind prosecuting me, that had direct evidence that I did not commit any crime. That's scary, right? And the fact that they were being so careless about their communication, it kind of like there's a derivative thing that's even scarier. It's like, how often does this happen? Right. That they're being so careless about it and so kind of like nonchalant. The way Hinman was sending emails, they're saying, you're doing something illegal, and he just continues just doing it like carelessly. Like, it's almost like there's something systemic within the government where they're feeling protected to do these outrageous things that we happen to see. This really may be, I don't know if it's a tip of the iceberg or a tip of one iceberg, and there's like, 100,000 other icebergs that we just don't see the tip of those. All I do know is if you're doing stuff as corrupt as what they were doing, and I'm going to just talk about my own prosecution, right? I proved that they fabricated the evidence. I proved FBI agents actually created the documentation that were used to prosecute me, right? And that they actually had evidence that I was innocent a year before they arrested me, that I could not have committed the crime. Not that I didn't, that I could not have committed any crime, right? And so, but I'm, look.
Isn't that a crime to fabricate evidence? Like, are there consequences for them doing that?
Well, the point is, like, it's unprecedented that they got caught with me, right? The fact that I showed. It wasn't just that I showed that this rogue agent did it. It was SEC-led civil agency that's not supposed to be involved in criminal prosecution. They were leading this against me with the cooperation of at least the FBI and the DOJ. Right. So these three agencies, three of the most powerful agencies on the face of the planet, are, I'm flattered, like, that they're it's really seriously. But in any event, it's like, that was never shown ever, that interagency collaboration, and the fact that they're being so careless about the documentation that I was able to locate it. It says to you, like, how often is this actually really happening, right? Because if this was, in my case, for example, I'll give you the one that they said was my co-defendant, right? And the scary guy, right? That was a government agent. That was, and he withdrew just his plea for, conspiracy. So now everything associated with my case is completely gone, right? But they said he had to be guilty because his co-defendant pled guilty. And we're like, wait a minute, he's a government agent. Why did we get tipped off he was a government agent? He had over 150 phone calls and text messages with the FBI agent that arrested me prior to them even starting to ostensibly prosecute me. But why are they having this communication? Like, there's no rationale, there's no reason, there's no example, there's no reason behind that, unless he's, and then we proved other stuff too. So I think, there's this extra level of thing that we should be concerned about, and one of the things that it hit me, I'll just leave it with this, is that when I really sunk in what happened to me, and what happened to me is inextricably tied into what was happening to Ripple, right? Because, if I came out and I think a lot of this has changed since I came, because they can't call me conspiracy theorist. I've got the documentation. I was there, and I have no reason. And I also proved that they fabricated the case against me. And I sat back and I thought about it, and I said, "Wow, I don't live in the country that I thought I lived in." right? I don't. Like there's no way to get around that. And instead of saying it in a negative way, what I've been trying to do is be positive and say, how do we get back to being the country that we think we are in, that has the liberties that we think we are, where we're looking down upon some of these other, regimes where there's, and they say, oh, we have liberty, we have this, we have that, and look at them. They can just take them and throw them into a van and take them. Well, guess what? I was thrown into a van and taken, so are we all that different? And, if nothing else, and with all due respect to everybody in crypto, and everybody knows how dear it is to my heart, there's a bigger question here right now. And it's more about liberty and all of this stuff, and it's bubbling up in crypto, right? But where else is it happening? It's not, the odds that this is a one-off event is very, very low.
Hopefully there was air conditioning in that van of yours, Steven. But on that topic, when you're speaking of this corruption, and we see government officials, an example, the 43rd Treasurer Rosie Rios moving to the company Ripple Labs, which you just mentioned, do you think that these movements are coming from previous actions, or what do you think is causing these individuals to move to companies that are within the blockchain space?
Well, I mean, the main prosecutor that was prosecuting me went to a law firm, and this was the guy that said, along with the FBI agents, that we want dozens of convictions it was really a witch hunt. It was a crypto witch hunt. And he now went over to a major law firm and is touting himself as a crypto defense attorney. Right? This was the guy, the people that he's defending, he was trying to, in a witch hunt with no probable cause, put them in jail. And they probably don't even realize when they're giving him a retainer check, they're like, this is the guy that wanted to, have you, in jail for the rest of your life. Right. So they're, going back and forth between government and private industry, look, that's happened forever. Right. And I think that's one area that you're bringing up that should be highlighted, where there should be more regulations around. There should be waiting periods. If you were involved in something that could potentially benefit you, and you've got a conflict of interest, which, him clearly didn't care about it while he was there. But there should be in my opinion, there should be a waiting period. So if you can benefit from some decisions that you made while you're in office, there should be like a 5-year waiting period where you can't take a private position that benefits you outside of, when you come back, and then maybe 5 years after, okay, fine. At some point you got to, let people, because you don't want good people not to come into government. So you want to be able to balance this. So I think those are the kinds of things you're talking about. So there's one where you're just clear, as Jimmy brought up, it's just like, what? You did this, and then you went and you immediately did that, and then there are other ones that are not necessary, that are natural. There are people that weave in and out in government, and you want that ability to do it. You just don't want them to be able to unfairly benefit from decisions that they've made. And where that line is, admittedly, there's a gray area there. But, look, I mean, we're a society. If we can't deal with gray area, we might as well just go back to being monkeys, Do
you think there's a place for some type of DAO infrastructure or governance that's put in place utilizing some of this technology to augment that and keep things from happening, like just systems and controls that can't be manipulated by people?
So, yeah, very much so. Look out. I don't know if it's 50 years, 100 years, or whatever, but eventually we're going to have decentralized government, right? There's not going to be some white guy up there making a decision whether or not, 100,000 people go to war, right? Like, that's really just stupid if you think about it. Just like nonsense. Like we're going to look back on this as the way we look at like slavery and like people own people, and then we're like, wait, one guy got to send 100,000 troops to go get killed. It was one, sure, Congress has to agree, and so I'm simplifying it a little bit. And one of the things I'm doing is, the project that I waited until I filed my lawsuit before I mentioned this, but it's a project called Clone, and it's an augmented reality digital twin of the Earth, right? And the point of that, I don't like using the word metaverse, but it's an augmented reality, but it kind of looks like the real world. But what it doesn't have is it doesn't have the content of the real world. So in that type of a situation, we can have a whole new governance structure, and people can test it out in a virtual world, right? And say let's test it out, because it's not as harmful in that virtual world. And one of the reason I was really doing that, and I built that, and it's based on a lot of them artificial intelligence technology that I've been building for 14 years, is because I want to give society a chance for a do-over. Right, even just war, right? Is we've just accepted because some caveman at some point did war, and then the next people decided that was okay, and we're today say war is okay, and we even have things called rules of engagement. Even that, why is that even acceptable, right? We get to question these things, and you're talking about governance. And letting people decide, or even a group of people, in a DAO setting environment, where they have a governance where they can vote.
Checks and balances, so what you have an augmented reality that shows you can speed up time once you've made decisions and see the ramifications of those. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Well, I mean, that's part of it, but really what we're saying is that there's no governance structure in place, right? So we can create whatever governance structure we want, and we're going to create the ability for everybody, 8 billion people on the planet, to help create a new governance structure. And they'll get it wrong at times, right? But let's say we're going to create a governance structure where if people that are coming in that are helping, let's say in that case it's the clone world, right? And doing something in the clone world, and then they say they go back in and they're making money in the clone economy, right? Maybe there's a DAO that's created, and certain people with expertise in the area, along with citizens, that are, I'm giving an example, and we can test it out in that environment. And the idea is, once people are in that environment, look at your, on this thing right now, look at your screen time. Most people would not show their screen time. It's embarrassing, right? Now imagine this is you dive into your phone and you're living in it. People are going to be like, wait, I like that environment a lot better. I like the fact that we're able to do something like what you were talking about, and then let's bring that idea back into the physical world.
So it's like a test net where you can test out new models and then manifest them into reality?
Right. Well, you're literally manifesting. Right. Exactly.
Could you say that's already going on right now in various parts of the world, especially with different corridors and testing how these networks are being utilized in various jurisdictions?
Well, sure. And look, I mean, I think, something I've said for a long time, that in crypto and decentralization, let's talk about it in a broader sense, technology is not the long-term issue. It's by far, it's going to be the easiest issue to be resolved. Governance is the long-term difficult issue. That one, we haven't even scratched the surface on. Let's take something like Ethereum or another decentralized network or Bitcoin, and it's how is it really governed? I mean, it is a decentralized network, right? But it still has to have rules. The way we've had where just core developers argue with other core developers on Bitcoin talk is just not how it should work, right? That's really, we're back in caveman days, right? And so that's probably a multi-decade endeavor. But I think having it in an augmented reality situation where, it's hard to understand because, you don't actually touch crypto, right? You don't touch these decentralized networks. It's kind of in your head, right? But if you're actually in the environment, we're still really basic creatures, right? We need to see pictures and like look the World Wide Web, right? The commercial internet existed, but we're such basic creatures until there were pictures. Like nobody wanted to use it, right? All of a sudden, pictures and like, oh, the Netscape moment. No, Netscape just gave us like visual, right? It was still there before that, right? Ask Tim Berners-Lee. I mean, it's like it wasn't a new thing, right? It was just like, I guess we're a lower level species, and that's fine. We'll develop, and so hopefully, I think in seeing these and actually seeing the effects of it in a way that we understand it. And seeing how that play out, and then bringing it back into the real world. And I say real world, and I will say this much: I think there's going to be such a blending. I call it gliding. We're going to be going in between the virtual and the real. So you just push, you push your glasses. Eventually we may not even glasses. Elon big in our head, right? Exactly. It'll just blink. Like from I Dream of Jeannie, and it'll just happen. And so but I call it gliding. You'll be going in between the two, and it'll almost be indistinguishable to the point where maybe it becomes indistinguishable, where you're bringing the good ideas, from this, testing ground, but this testing ground, you may be spending probably more time of your daily life in than what we consider the physical world today.
Hey, thank you for that, Steven. We're getting close to 30 minutes past the hour. We've been on this call for nearly an hour and a half. I know Jake has to leave here shortly, and I want to get his perspective on one thing before he jumps. Bringing this back to ETHGate, Jake, do you think that there could be a digital economy? And I'm asking you this question particularly because you've been bringing up infrastructure and this is in your wheelhouse. Do you think there could be a digital economy without Ethereum and its associated platforms?
That's a good question. I think that the EVM will probably end up being an integral part of whatever is created, right? So you've got an EVM sidechain that's been attached to the XRPL. Matic, they've been I've been at a lot of different conferences lately. Their CEO's been at those. It's a layer 2 on top of Ethereum, right? So it seems like he's becoming multi-chain and providing value and integrating with other networks. And I think that the future is multi-chain, right? Like I don't think that there's one that ends up ruling every aspect, but I do think there needs to be interoperability. And for that, there's going to be components of Ethereum, the EVM, that kind of mold over time, like Steve was talking about, and might be implemented in different aspects across different networks. But and that'll evolve, right? Python and Solidity, from what I have discussions with our developers, Rust and some other languages are superior to that for everything that they're developing. A0, Matt Niemerg is one of our partners in Syndicatlely, which you mentioned in the beginning. He has a fantastic technology for L0. But there's partners that are already ingrained in infrastructure. There's a human element to this, and that's problematic. But it's also beneficial for free market capitalism, like Jimmy pointed out in the beginning, right? You can have parties that partner up and foster innovation between one another and help lift each other, right? And if you've got the right people in your ecosystem, then you can make a lot of progress. I don't think the main net of Ethereum scales. And if your question is specific to that, I do think that goes away. I think it's an Alta Vista or a Netscape. But I do think that the EVM as a component that was developed within that is used within, lots of future applications.
Excellent. How about before you go, we've got a couple more minutes left.
Okay.
Give me your prediction of the market in the next 4 years under a new administration.
Oh, man. A lot of this conversation is centered around how fast technology is progressing. I think we're at the point on Moore's Law where things start to go exponential. If you haven't ever read The Future is Faster Than You Think, I would encourage people that are watching to read that book. It talks about all the different converging technologies that are, it was 2019 when that book was written, previous to, COVID in the last 5 years. But even more so today, I see AI, I see blockchain smart contracts, I see biotech, I see 3D printing, I see all of these different things converging and you're going to need to foster innovation in ways that we have in the past, but even in a greater sense, because you're going to have companies that disrupt industries that are like the blockbuster. You know, everybody remembers going to get movies, and then Netflix came along, and it took a little while, but then Netflix obviously is the premier one now. I think that you're going to have situations, you know, where you solve a problem, you have a niche, there's a huge market for it, and then the next technology that completely removes that moves in, and another company comes up overnight, and it'll be on a cadence that's protracted that people just really aren't used to. And so, I think that this next administration is likely going to foster that. You know, I'm kind of agnostic on who gets in there. I think that as long as we are able to remove some of the corruption and other things that's been obvious at this point, and get good actors in the space, people that understand these technologies. I think education's a big component of it as well. I think, you know, a lot of the legislators maybe aren't up to date on a lot of these technologies, or how the impacts could be downstream of them stymieing it or picking winners, or, you know, fostering innovation. So I like your clone world, right? Because if you are able to take an oracle and take the constraints that exist in reality here and put that in that ecosystem, and then play out scenarios, you can see the downstream effects of that, kind of like a Project Spyglass type situation, right? And then you're able to take the best pieces of that and remove the problems that you're going to have, and then put that into reality that we have today. So hopefully there's a tool like you're providing that's used within government. I think that's really cool what you're building.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jake. Now you can go.
Yeah. I do have a meeting, so I do have to hop here, but I appreciate you having me on, and I'm, you know, grateful for the conversation. I think that a lot of the people in this space are going to be on the cutting edge of what's coming, and, you know, I'm happy to be a part of it. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate you, sir.
We'll see y'all.
Let's go back a question with we'll go for another 10 more minutes if you guys have some time. Steven, do you think that there could be a digital economy without Ethereum?
I mean, sure, of course. I mean, there's digital economy without, you know, nothing. I think history has shown that nothing is ever indispensable, right? There's, you know, the question is, back to what Jake was talking about, the convergence of technologies, right? And so I've seen layer one blockchains that, in my opinion, are ahead of anything actually out there right now. And they've got like AI embedded in them, you know, from, you know, native really at the outset, it was designed that way. And so in many ways, you know, all of the blockchains right now are, you know, kind of like the first iteration, and technology has shown that it's very rare that the winner long term comes out of that first iteration. So the likelihood that Ethereum, as we see it today, you know, and that again also points to some of the stuff that Jake and Jimmy have talked about, and Molly and yourself about, you know, pieces of it may still make it in, you know, pieces of the EVM. There's a lot of stuff in that ecosystem that, you know, there are really world-class engineers. I've seen them, you know, in the Ethereum ecosystem. And, you know, this is not about the Ethereum ecosystem. But forgetting about all of this, you know, corruption and all of this other stuff, we're just talking about from a technology standpoint, the likelihood that we've seen the ultimate 800-pound gorilla, even in a multi-chain world, is probably very, very, very low. That we've seen that winner. It's probably not, forget about Ethereum, you know, I mean, any of the current chains are probably not the winner, at least not in their current form. Mm-hmm. And part of them may make it into something else. And a lot of this has to do, I think, back to what Jake was just talking about, it's the convergence of these technologies that were not really taken into account in 2014, 2015, 16, 17, right? You know, but today, And I think having our ChatGPT moment, a couple of years, within the last couple of years, has a big component. So, that cross section, I happened. I didn't intend it this way, but I got involved, deep in AI in 2010 because I was trying to solve a certain problem, and then I got deep into blockchain and crypto in the same year, right? And so I'm at the cross sections personally at blockchain, crypto, and AI. And when you look at really where that cross section is, it's hard to imagine a world where those three are not intersecting and being the winning blockchain, having real strong components of all three of those.
Molly, have any thoughts?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I've had this thesis that Ethereum is very analogous to AOL. AOL was a pioneer in instant messaging, and that revolutionized internet communications across a generation, and that many other businesses and software applications use that same idea. I also think that the internet is probably the most revolutionary technology paradigm shift in our lifetime, and blockchain technology is sort of like the next iteration or chapter in that story. And we've seen, even just in the internet technology timeline, lots of big players have had their sort of peak moment, and then a new thing, a new shift, a new market sentiment kind of comes in and things move around. So, Ethereum is key in this story of the evolution of blockchain. I don't see them being the brand that they are in another cycle, because as we just mentioned, superior technology has come in that is far more efficient. I mean, money loves efficiency, and unfortunately, due to the gas fees, it's just not practical or reasonable to use Ethereum for a wide variety of applications. You want to make payroll to your entire team, you got 1,000 employees, you're not going to pay an Ethereum gas fee on each of those transactions, just as one example. But I think smart contracts are revolutionary, and sort of this just idea of what Ethereum represents in terms of a decentralized kind of platform to do all of these exchanges, in some cases with rules like if-then statements. But I think that it could absolutely survive without Ethereum, and it probably will in the next cycle or next generation. But I think we'll always remember the contributions that Ethereum brought to the table, in the same way that AOL brought instant messaging, even though people may get fun of if they still use an AOL email address.
I think my mother still does. Okay, well, last question here, guys and gal. Let's have some fun and speculate a little bit more. As this nascent asset class exceeds beyond a $2 trillion market cap, as stablecoin regulations come into the fold here in the U.S., as MiCA also gets launched overseas, creating a consistent regulatory framework for crypto abroad. What do you anticipate the market to look like in the next 4 years under the new administration, and with stablecoin issuers like Circle having entered the public markets? Let's start with you, Jimmy.
Oh, I was hoping to have somebody else answer that question first. I could.
Well, how about
the new administration?
Okay.
Is the new administration going to be the old administration or the older administration? Well, what administration? I do think obviously Trump's come out and embraced crypto, right? I think Ryan Selkis was at Mar-a-Lago or something with them, and they even had some like gold branding on his podium or something where he's like Trump's pro crypto or something like that. So assuming it plays out like that, I think that could be helpful. I think there are bigger things at play. There's a movement globally to move back to a sound money standard, a gold standard. I think now 45 states have removed all taxation on transactions in precious metals and capital gains and things like that. I think that politically, I think we're becoming more decentralized. We're even what happened to Steven. Steven is an American hero, right? Because of what he went through. Horrible to have to go through it, but he survived. I wish him all the best on he should get treble damages for what he's even suing. It's a big number, right? But he should get treble damages for, and then think of all the good things that he will go and do with that money. But, politically, society, humanity is moving towards less centralization. We want more power over our individual decisions and things of that. So I see that's a big part of what's impacting these industries. From a business standpoint, I can tell you the wave is coming in so rapidly now. Larry Fink really kicked it. He poked the big hole in the dam type of thing. But even today, I was reading that Vanguard said they weren't going to have a crypto ETF, a Bitcoin ETF. Well, guess what? That's in January. We're in May. Their CEO is out. The guy who filed the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, new CEO, right? This is going to be happening, and I predict it's going to be this year. If you are a anti-crypto CEO, certainly of any financial type driven institution, you're going to be decapitated. You're going to be removed because this is the way the world is going, like it or not. We know very, very well that most of the major institutions know this is an issue for them. They want to transfer into digital. They have no clue how to do it. So they're looking now to what they're calling crypto native companies and people like everybody on this call and everybody probably watching this call to basically do it for them, because they've lived in a world where you just throw money at the problem, outsource, get somebody else to do that heavy lifting for me because they don't want to think about it or whatever. And there's not really that many people who can even have a conversation about what is necessary to do and traverse the project management process of taking assets that live in a paper world and moving them into a real digital asset world. So this has just begun. It's going to get really, really exciting. And I think, my advice for people, entrepreneurs, people involved in the space is do exactly what you want to do. Be patient. A lot of people are chasing kind of, venture capital dollars or seed investment dollars because they want to implement everything like right now. And I've certainly been there, but just, hold out to your vision and what you really want to do because it's coming your way. You're going to be able to kind of pick and choose the subject matter that you want to focus on that really kind of gets you inspired and where your creativity will really blossom. And so good days ahead. In fact, what I think we should do is pull the same panel back together month from now. And let's don't talk about ETHGate anymore. Let's don't look backwards anymore. Let's talk about all we have and all the knowledge we have and what we want to build going forward, including politically.
Amen.
Love to hear that. Molly?
Well, that's tough to follow. I share Jimmy's enthusiasm and optimism that we are on the cusp of a very exciting new season globally and certainly within even the United States, that the move back to sound money will highlight a lot of the shady practices that are going on. I mean, watching this GameStop thing play out kind of in real time is just another example of these kind of shenanigans that the financial insiders have been using. But when you have money on the blockchain and the transactions are available for people to analyze, it's a lot harder to do something like a naked short, pretend you have an asset that you don't really have. And so as more people become aware of these types of activities and start to say, we're done with this. We're not going to be kind of used in this matrix slave system anymore. We want real money. We want the freedom and ability to transact with whomever we choose. We want rules that actually benefit the people and aren't simply in place to protect a caste system or a monopoly that has used their money and their strength to protect their own interests. 10 years ago, this types of conversation they weren't happening, certainly kind of in the main square on places like Twitter and YouTube. And you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once people are aware of all of this corruption, now we're looking for it. I mean, I don't want to manifest more corruption, but if you try to trick me at this point, it's going to be a lot harder than it would have been a decade ago. We're also seeing sort of sovereignty movements, state national movements, where people are pooling together and saying, if this government is so broken and so corrupt, let's just make our own. Who says we have to be part of your corrupt U.S. corporation that is traded our birth certificates on some marketplace. Like, enough. We would like to have autonomy and control over our own future. And I think for the first time in humanity, like, people are stepping up and actually have the resources and the intelligence and the software and whatever you need to make those things a reality, which is very exciting to be a part of.
Love to hear that. And before we get to you, Steven, I just wanted to bring up the fact that Molly and Jimmy, you're going to be speaking at the Quantum Summit next month. So yes. Anything that you guys are going to be sharing that you'd like to discuss real quick here? Yeah, so I'm actually the MC of the event. Jimmy's going to be giving the opening remarks, and we're very excited to talk about some of these topics like sovereignty and independence, and building the world that you want to live in, and taking some responsibility for visualizing what that looks like, talking to people who have similar interests. I love Steven's clone software, because you could go in to a virtual world and like imagine a scenario or a situation, see it play out, and then decide if it actually is what you want it to be, and then go manifest that in the real world. I think that we're seeing this movement globally, that people are taking more control over our own futures and saying we're not weak victims. Like, we have the power and the strength to build the world that we want to do it. So let's just go do it. And that's part of what the Quantum Summit is about, is taking these ideas and taking the step to manifest them into reality. Thank you for that, Molly. And last but certainly not least, Steven, let's close it down, sir. What do you foresee for the next 4 years? Do you envision, I mean, I know you don't want to talk about Ethereum anymore, but do you envision even a migration of Ethereum developers moving from the chain, having this new security designation looming above them?
It's highly likely, right, that they'll start diversifying into other aspects, other chains. I think the next 4 years, Jimmy made a good point. It's like, which administration are you talking about? On the other hand, I think as far as crypto goes, we've hit the tipping point. If you look at how many people in the U.S. that have touched crypto, it's a very high percentage. And as you get down in the demographics, and the lower demographics are actually a big voice in this country. The majority of them have crypto, and they find it, and the popularity favorable rating of crypto is extremely high. They understand that this is a way to kind of like level the playing field, and this is like something for the average person to be on a level playing field with the big boys, and they kind of get that, right? And it's programmable and all of that. That becomes even more stark when you go overseas. Like, we're really behind, 3-4 steps behind. You go overseas and people, they're not Venmoing each other. They're sending Bitcoin to each other after dinner, to split the bill or whatever. And it's just like, crypto is just being used in everyday transactions. Crypto is being talked about, and it's just kind of blending into the social fabric of and the business and the economy and the governments of most every place else, other than the U.S., right? And it's very big in the U.S. So, all of that says to me, we're past the tipping point, and it's kind of an inevitability. All that being said, I just want to, and as positive as I feel about the future, and I don't think we're drinking Kool-Aid, but I do think we need to be aware of something, that this is not going to happen on its own, because this very same technology that's giving us this freedom and leveling the playing field. And I think I may have been the first one to actually predict CBDC's development. It's on my YouTube channel. It's at Steven Nerayoff. You can check it out. And ironically, not to bring it up again, but the person at the end said Joe Lubin out of nowhere discredited me, which was interesting. But the point there is, the governments view themselves as controlling people, right? It's unfortunate, and I hope we get away from that notion, right? But that's historically what it's been, and it still is today. That's what they view their job as. We don't view their job as being that, but they view their job as controlling the population as much as they can. And the same technology that Satoshi gave birth to, right, is now going to be also utilized in reverse. So while what I basically see is these two systems coming up over, let's call it the next, decade or two. One is going to be an open, transparent, decentralized networks, which is kind of a new system, which is outside of our current system. Then I see the same technology being used to increase what's technocracy, right, and controlled by the government. CBDCs is a great example, but it's not the only example, right? And blockchain, crypto, and AI being mixed together, as great as it is here, governments are not stupid, right? As part of the Hinman emails, there was a 2014 document that talked about tech task forces on cryptocurrency. And in there, it says that they had meetings with the governors of the Board of Federal Reserve. So I mean, like they were aware of this stuff in 2014. Don't think the government is behind. The government's way ahead of, and they're doing things, Gensler said, slow down, in that MIT thing that he talked about. That's how the incumbents overtake a disruptive technology, and it's kind of what's happening here. So I think you're going to be seeing governments using the same technologies to try to control the population, while there's this other system that the same technologies are using to kind of break out a new system. And then the question is, and I think eventually is an inevitability. One system is going to gobble up the other system, right? One of them is going to be the ghost, and one of them is going to be Pac-Man, right? And so it's which one is which, and I'm on the decentralization side. It's the question is when, how much pain do we have to go through, and we have to demand this, right? We have to put in people, like a John Deaton. That's key, right? Having somebody like him, and other people, right, that support John Dean for U.S. Senate, very much so, and get presidents and other people, and even shareholders, like Jimmy was talking about, demand that your CEO is pro-crypto friendly. Make it kind of taboo not to be. Right, and being crypto friendly is just being, it's not like it's a cult, right? It's like it's decentralization, right? There's nothing bad, there's nothing really inherently bad about it. There is, though, it could be used for bad purposes if in the wrong hands, and so that's what I think we have to guard against. So that's kind of how I see things playing out.
Appreciate your perspective, Steven. Before I let you go here, I had the privilege of interviewing Christopher Giancarlo, former CFTC chairman. I asked him, because we were talking about similar topics here in regards to, the U.S. being a laggard. Meanwhile, we have potentially the rights to certain patents. We have cloud. We have the U.S. dollar. There's a lot of things working for the U.S. So is it by design that we are a laggard, allowing other regions of the world to catch up and quote unquote level the playing field? Do you think that's part of what's going on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Gary Gensler literally just gave a class on this at MIT. He was head of the CFTC, and now he's head of the SEC. So it's not like this is like, some guy, this isn't like the Unabomber living out in, the woods saying this. This is like the insider of all insiders, giving you the play-by-play book of how government and incumbents work to stifle disruptive technology. And this is really, really the huge take home. The government does not want to kill crypto. The government does not want to in any way destroy crypto. The government simply wants to control it, right? The government loves crypto more than we love crypto, right? Or just as much as we love crypto. They're just as much as fans of crypto. They're just not fans of crypto being decentralized and not in their control, right? We're fans of crypto not being in their control. So really the question does not come down to, are they crypto or pro-crypto or negative? Everybody's pro-crypto. The question is, who's going to control the future of crypto? There's the decentralized, where nobody's in control of it and everybody's in control of it at the same time. And then there's the group in the government that is like, we're going to control it. And I think that's really where the battle is just coming down to. And that's what we're talking about.
Well received, sir. Before we end the room. Any final last words, Jimmy, Molly, Steven?
I think the level playing field can be looked at from a different direction, which is we've lived in this world where the dollar has dominated and has been used as a political weapon to harm people in many other countries. Wars have been started. You know, if you look at the history of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi attempting to trade oil outside of the dollar system. So if the blockchain technology had taken off organically with no interference, it's very likely due to the US innovation sort of philosophy that the US would have dominated the crypto blockchain ecosystem. And the countries around the world wouldn't have really been able to compete fairly in a new money system that requires technology understanding. So the US being held back might end up being like the solution to a global peace, to be honest, and that these other countries now have this infrastructure in place. They know how it works. They're using this stuff. And then once the US is kind of like a racehorse that's like let out of the gate, these other countries, like it's like golf handicap, like they have a little bit of a head start, so that we have this level playing field and everybody can compete and participate in the global marketplace without the US just automatically dominating right at the start.
Thank you for that, Jimmy.
I haven't heard Molly say that before. That's really cool. I agree with you. So yeah, I mean, Chris Larson all but said as much publicly. He said, Silicon Valley dominated blockchain. But for kind of it starts to happen right around when the ICO craze 2017, followed by Hinman's speech in 2018, and then kind of what played out in the few years after. We would have America would have dominated. Jimmy Vallee wouldn't have been involved because it would have gone so far so fast. Nerayoff would have been involved, but. So I guess, we need to be grateful that it has kind of passed the way it has. I do think geopolitically there's something going on with not just allowing the other markets to embrace crypto, but also to move towards a sound money standard ahead of America that is going to turn out to be very rewarding from kind of a peace and dealing with each other going forward, a level playing field, as we say. So,
and last words from you, Steven.
I agree with you guys. Both made very good points, right? I guess as optimistic as I am, I'm also realistic that there's still very powerful alliances, and so while I have been to the heat centers of where crypto is going, and I just came back from Dubai, a couple of trips over there, and it's just blossoming. It's just absolutely blossoming. The royal family has embraced it, and they've proper regulation, and it's just beautiful. What the EU is going, the direction they're going, beautiful, right? And so you see all of that, and at the same time, I don't forget that there's old relationships and alliances and geopolitics, and crypto is one aspect of that, right? And so what other to think that crypto is playing in a vacuum, I think might just be a little bit naive for us, and I think we don't really have the luxury of being naive. We're up against some powerful forces, and so crypto is one of the things that shits on the table that are being bandied about, because what we've seen is the U.S. has very much these little islands where you had Malta for a while was like the center of it, and then the EU was like no, you're not going to do that. Estonia was a big center, like no, you're not going to do that, and they were because there's bigger things at play in geopolitics. So we just have to be aware that we don't. As much as crypto is our world, there are bigger forces and other aspects at play, and so how that ends up developing. Could the U.S. be slowing it down? Yes, the handicap aspect of it, but the U.S. has a lot of other cards to play against these other countries, right? And so could they be, having some, it's hard to imagine that there's no conversations going on behind the scenes. I think it would be naive to be thinking that.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Steven. Well, with that being said, let's wind things down here. We've been on the call for nearly 2 hours, a little longer than expected, but absolutely well worth it. There were more than 8,000 people from all over the world on this call, on this live stream that joined us today, hungry for the truth. Thank you all to our panelists, Steven, Molly, Jimmy, and Jake, who had to take off a little earlier. Thank you all for joining us. And to those of you in the audience, I hope you were able to take away a few bits of information from this call. I'll do my very best to have the band back ASAP. And if you enjoyed today's production and want to see more, I ask that you please subscribe to this channel, like and share this video. D for all the above. Hope you have a great rest of your day and week. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thank you all here thank you, panels.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, everybody.